On behalf of Bill Gross, the board, and the countless professional volunteers who have dedicated hundreds and thousands of hours to farm rescue, I'd like to welcome you to the corn planter safety and operation presentation. As you can see, we have a John Deere 8360R and a DB60. The John Deere 8360R V8 is the series John Deere designates for this class of tractor. The 360 is the 360 horsepower, and the R stands for row crop. The DB60 is a John Deere, so it's Deere, followed by the B, which is Bauer Manufacturing. Bauer Manufacturing and John Deere had a partnership, and now they make planters together, and the 60 signifies 60 feet of planting width. This particular planter is a 47 row 15 or a 24 row 30-inch spacing. You do corn and soybeans with this particular planter. You can do some other crops, but that's pretty much what we use this planter for, farm rescue. The 8360R is just over 30,000 pounds. The DB60 empty is just over 30,000 pounds. By the time you add 800 gallons of fertilizer and you add 100 units of seed, you're pushing well around 40,000 pounds. So altogether, you got a 70,000 pound machine going down the road or in the field. Any equipment of this size and this kind of weight is something to be respected, and a healthy sense of fear is necessary to maintain control and to keep your head. These 8000R John Deere tractors, this is where you place the fuel in. They hold 180 gallons of fuel. Whenever you're fueling, whether it be at a farmer's yard or from a fuel truck, you want to make sure you don't obviously come in contact with the fuel and keep it out of your eyes and such. To operate the fuel cap, you just flip it up, give it a quarter of a turn, and then wiggle it, and then just let it hang down by the chain, and then you can place the nozzle in and fill her up. To replace the cap, reverse the process, drop the chain in, just make sure you don't try to tap the side, because as you can see, there's a lot of dirt and dust and so on right along the edge. The less you disturb it, the better. That way the fuel filter doesn't get plugged as fast. Set it down, give it a quarter of a turn, and then bring it over center till it locks in place. Now it's nice and snug and replaced. Just make sure when you fill with fuel that you put it back on, as if you leave it run for a couple hours like this, you're going to end up plugging your fuel filter with all the dirt and dust that gets in the tank. This here is where you check the oil. Every morning, of course, it's a good practice and policy to give the oil a check. You just spin her counterclockwise and take a look on the dipstick. You've got different marks. Right here we're at the top, the 3 dots. We are at the full position. To replace the cap, reverse the process clockwise till it's just nice and snug. If for some reason key gets left on, battery's dead, the actual batteries are behind here. But to actually jump or charge the battery system, here is you have your positive and here is the negative. Obviously, indicated by this decal, never ever jump between the two. You could potentially have it in gear and run yourself over. Here's the cord. If for some reason it's really cold at night, you need to plug her in for the morning. This is a block heater. As you can see, this area in here is a potential pinch point. There should be no reason why anyone should be in between here while the machine is running, none whatsoever. But you need to be aware that if these different connection points need to be greased about every other day or about 50 hours, again, you want to make sure the equipment is shut off and the key is removed. But again, this is a pinch point as the wheels are allowed to turn back and forth between the frame of the tractor and the tire. If for some reason you need to gain access to the top of the motor, the hood opens by pulling this release latch, grabbing this plastic cowl here on the side, and just lift straight up. A fully raised position, you can get access at lines in the top of the motor for any reason. Right here is your air filter. In really dusty conditions, once a week, you should probably pull the air filter out and blow it out and give it a good cleaning. So you just raise the hood all the way up and you can just pop these little tabs loose and you can get access to your air filter. Get out the air filter, just grab it on both sides, give it a little twist, and it slides right off. The inner filter you should never have to blow out. You just need to lay this on the ground and you can blow the air out. Wiggle with it real carefully. You should find the spot where it comes in and fits in snug. So you're about an inch off of the edge. So it's nice and sitting in its seat good. Place the cover. Make sure all the clips engage with the outside ring around the outside casing. Nice and snug. By raising the hood, you gain access to the coolant fill. As you can see, there's lines on the side indicating full or add. Take the cap off on the top and add your coolant as necessary. Here's your filters. The one on the left is your oil filter. One on the right is a fuel filter. If you want to drain some fuel out every so often, just to make sure you don't have any water in your fuel, turn it counterclockwise. So the fuel starts to drip out the bottom. Get rid of the water in the line. After it's run just a little bit, turn her back clockwise, or excuse me, counterclockwise, sorry. Clockwise to get it open, counterclockwise to shut it. And then once it's tight, fuel should stop flowing and you've drained the water. That's something you only need to do every couple weeks or so. To return the hood to the closed position, firmly grasp on this lip here, pull straight down. Make sure your hands are clear of the pinch point here where it comes tight against the tractor. Carefully hanging onto the edge, drop it down, and then pick up a little just to make sure the latch is firmly engaged. In agriculture, this is what is known as a three-point connection. Several implements in agriculture use the three-point. We do not in this application with the DB60, but still it's a big piece of metal. These buttons right in here are what control from the outside this entire three-point, these cylinders, from going up and down. You want to make sure you don't accidentally hit these buttons while you're in between here and get crushed. You want to make sure the three-point is in the fully raised position. If this three-point accidentally gets into the lowered position, these ears will end up dropping all the way down to about a foot to 1.25 feet off the ground. Obviously you can see now if you start to turn tight, this ear ends up ramming right into the side of your tongue and will twist this tongue all to mess. So make sure your three-point is always in the fully raised position. It should never be down whatsoever. All these hydraulic lines you see, when they're engaged, have an incredible amount of pressure on them. So whenever operators in the cab, best practice for your own safety is to not be standing in this area back here. That way, if one isn't properly placed, it's not going to pop out and spray you with hydraulic fluid. So you want to stand off a ways to the side when somebody's operating the hydraulic lines. Start off with the electrical connections. This here connection is your flashers and your tail lights for the back of the planter. Self-explanatory, it can only plug into one electrical connection. Next one going down, this is part of your row shutoff and your computer monitor cords. Again, this one can only fit into one connection for your electrical. This is another monitoring cord for a second system on the planter. It only plugs into this connection, cannot be confused. And this connection here also cannot be mistaken. This is what powers your individual shutoff units and provides the 12-volt current to start and stop your shutoffs for your rows. This line here also connects up behind the panel here. This is what gives you the video feed for the closed circuit for your rear view camera on your 2630 screen. Moving over to your hydraulics, you have number 4 on top, number 1's on the bottom. They are labeled with these individual colored blocks and they're grouped together so you can't confuse which one goes in which. Just follow the numbers on the connectors and place them into the receptacles there on the SCVs. And on the bottom you have a continuous high pressure to keep the fans on, and a return and a second return. Just make sure those are plugged into the return side, and the one on the left there is plugged into the continuous high pressure. They are labeled, and so if the red zip tie to the red connection, the blue zip tie to the blue connection, and then that return line, constant return, will only plug into that line, so you cannot mistake that return. That is what prevents the individual fans from blowing seals when they shut off, and it allows the fans to slow down both your vacuum and your CCS fan and come to a safe stop at the end of operation. As you can see, these electrical connections and hydraulic lines are very fragile. You want to make sure that they're tied up and out of the way. If they're hanging down too low, they can get in between the tongue of the tractor and the hitch on the planter and get squeezed in this pinch point, because this planter is rocking back and forth as gravity allows it. So you want to make sure you've got a good 6 inches of clearance between any of the electrical and hydraulic lines to keep them from getting pinched or caught on the corner or in between on the cylinder. Just make sure they're kind of tied together and neatly in place to keep them from getting destroyed. As you can see, this is a big 2.5 inch pin. It's got a self-locking D-ring on the top here. As long as this ring is dropped down behind the edge here, it's locked in place. There's no way for this pin to work its way out. That's the safety feature on these big pins for the big modern equipment. You also notice you have a safety chain. If for some reason, whatever it may be, mechanical failure or get stuck or you name it, you have to unhook. After, of course, unhooking all your hydraulic lines and electrical and all your connections between the tractor, and you're going to want to make sure you take your safety chain off and your pin out. And then put the jack up and set it on the ground. Just make sure if you have to put the chain back in, you loop it through this D-ring and also around the tongue support frame on the tractor. That gives you an added level of security, making sure it's tied in right with the frame of the tractor for the safety chain. As indicated by this warning decal, you can see that, like we talked about earlier, this piece of equipment, when it's fully loaded, is pushing 40,000 pounds. You get going down the road and you start getting squirrely on your steering, there's a potential to start getting the dog or the tail wagging the dog and start shoving you around. So just, steer nice and smooth, and if it's getting a little squirrely, slow down. There's no harm in going a little slow. We need to make it there safe to help the family farmer. Moving on to the tongue. As you see, you have a cylinder. When you're in the planting field position, you want to take the tongue all the way down. In other words, the cylinder will be pulled completely in. You will see none of the shiny ramrod where the tongue is all the way lowered. In the transport position, you're going to want to have the tongue all the way raised with the entire cylinder ram exposed and the tank as high as it can go to give you clearance going down the road. These individual manual valves control the vacuum pressure on the individual wings. You have one on this side and two identical ones on the opposite side of the cylinder housing on the tongue. The only time you need to use these manual valves is in order to equalize your wings. In other words, one SCV in the back of the tractor controls both wings. Sometimes, for whatever reason, the amount of fluid, hydraulic fluid, gets out of sync between the wings. So in order to equalize your vacuum pressure to keep them within 1 pound or so of each other, you're going to need to adjust the valve to get them to equalize so that both wings are at the same pressure. Your SCV number 3 controls your main frame vacuum pressure, which is the 6 rows that are fixed to the main frame. And SCV number 4 controls the vacuum pressure to both the right and left wing on this planter. So to get the number 4 equalized between the wings, sometimes you need to adjust the valves. As you see, this is a mini air compressor. Anytime you need to charge the airbag system for the individual suspension of the row units, when you're first beginning to charge, you want to use an air compressor, which we have in the back of the pickup. But to make minor adjustments, you can flip the switch on the side and kick this little air compressor on. There's a gauge on the front side here. You want to run them, it's kind of a ballpark around the 60 to 80 range depending on the ground conditions. The idea is to keep your row units from bouncing, therefore knocking seed out of your plates and causing ricochet down the seed tube. The smoother the individual row units ride, the better equal spacing of your kernels, therefore the better yield, especially with corn. To adjust, this one here is the 30. which is 30-inch row spacing. So normally when you're planting all of corn and most soybeans, you're going to be running on 30-inch spacing. So this valve here, you can see by the indication of the flow chart, is taking air pressure from the compressor and it's routing it down this air tube, which then goes down through the planter support beams and goes to the individual air units, the individual airbags on each of the individual row units. On the other side is the 15, so if you're doing interplants where you're doing 47 rows on 15-inch spacing, which would of course only be for soybeans, then you would turn this valve to apply pressure for those individual row units for the 15-inch spacing. If you want to dissipate some pressure, you have too much air pressure in the line, if you turn this valve to the down position, it allows air to escape out of the orifice on the bottom and it'll decrease the amount of pressure in the line, therefore decreasing the amount of pressure on the individual bags on the individual units. Right here is the valve stem. It's identical to any standard Schrader valve on a tire. You just use a regular connection for inflating a tire, and that is how you place air from the air compressor in the pickup to charge the airbags at the beginning of the season, or if you need more than a 5 or so pound increase throughout the planting season. As you notice right now, the gauge is reading around 40. It's going to always read low when the planter is raised. When you drop SCV number 1 and drop all the units into the ground, the air pressure will obviously rise as the pressure is placed on each of the individual bags. So you never want to judge the pressure level with the planter raised. You always want to drop it down into continuous planting mode while of course tractor is stopped, but to make sure you have an accurate reading on the gauge of somewhere around 60 to 80 pounds, depending, give or take. This gauge here is an indication of the pressure within the CCS tanks and the fan to supply seed from the central commodity tanks to the mini hopper. Ideally, you're going to be running this somewhere between the about 14 to 25 range. Most of the time around the 18 kind of average, depends how much treatment is on the seed and how big the seed is, the humidity in the air, and a few other conditions. So ideally around the 18 figure. This gauge is the same as the one on the back. We need to have this gauge up here because of the tank placement. You cannot see the gauge on the rear. Once you start planting, it's a good habit every time to look around once you've got auto steer engaged and just make sure that this needle is rising and you're providing air pressure to continue to feed the mini hoppers and keep seed supplied to the row units. Moving on from the tongue, the next portion of the seed delivery system on this DB60 is your CCS fans. From the fan, it goes off to the left, comes into a T, splits off into each side. The plumbing comes down into the plenum, which splits into the individual units feed tubes underneath here. The air is ejected through the tube to carry the seed to the individual mini hoppers through each of these individual tubes down to each of the units throughout the entire mainframe and wing. This air is routed through the tubes and also into the tank to allow equal pressure on top of the seed in the tank as well as below the seed. That allows the seed to flow freely with the assistance of the agitator and continue providing seed to each of the individual row units. Right here is the gauge, just like we observed at the front of the planter. Due to the fertilizer tanks blocking the view of this one, they've provided us with a second gauge up front. These gauges read the exact same reading. When you come back here to adjust to get to that 18, usually 18 to 20 pound range, somewhere in there, you'll take this valve here and adjust clockwise or counterclockwise until you get your adequate reading displayed by the gauge. The normal position is always plant or tank cleanout, which is the down position of the switch. These poly tanks you see mounted on the main frame, the front one holds 400 gallons, the rear one holds 420 gallons. We use these for the fertilizer for starter. which is about 11 pounds a gallon. Very heavy product, and it has a acidic value to it. You don't really want to get it all over your skin, and certainly don't want to get it in your eyes. We also will use these tanks for your insecticide if a farmer wants to put on for rootworm. For corn would be a good example, and especially with insecticide, you want to make sure that you're using your rubber gloves and goggles because at a high enough dose, what will kill an insect will kill a human being. You can see from the warning decal, agriculture chemicals may cause eye, skin, or breathing problems. To avoid injury, you need to stay out of the fumes. This here is where you add the chemical, whether it be insecticide or the starter fertilizer. This over here is the pump that applies the fertilizer, and obviously you have a chain here. You want to make sure you keep your hand out of this chain and every other chain that drives each of the individual units. Talc powder is another thing you don't want to be breathing in. Whenever you fill seed, you're going to want to use talc. It's basically baby powder, and it allows the seed to drop off of the individual discs at a consistent rate, so you have precise seed placement, and it also creates a lubricant when the seed is flowing from your CCS tanks to your individual mini hoppers. So when you're adding this talc, you want to make sure you are upwind from the talc, so as the dust dissipates, you're not breathing that in and filling your lungs with all that baby powder. Right here you see our CCS, which stands for your Central Commodity System tanks. Each one of these tanks holds 50 units, and all the seed, nearly all the seed today on the market is treated with an insecticide, and some are also treated with a herbicide to prevent weed growth. So anytime you're handling the corn seed in particular, but also bean seed, you want to make sure you're using gloves and washing your hands as soon as you're done, and not breathing in the dust. To remove the lid on top of the Central Commodity System tanks, grab on it, turn counterclockwise. As you can see by the arrow, to unlock the lid, turn counterclockwise. Spin it about, a revolution and a half, 2 revolutions. There is a cord to hold the lid from falling off. You can just let it go to the side. You can see down in here we have the agitator and the individual air tubes that pick up the individual kernels of seed and move them from the CCS tank to the mini hopper. That agitator you see goes back and forth, and about a half a rotation back and forth just to keep the seed loose around the intakes for the tubes to the mini hoppers. You can use this hook, attach it to the end of the spout, hook it on the edge of the tank, hook it in here. That way it stays up and it doesn't fall into the tank when you're filling seed. This light here gives you light to glow and let you know how much is left in the tank at night. Give you a reference on the edge of the tank. Turn that on. She's got this push button. You put it on the dim setting and let her hang right like that on the carabiner. Scoop is placed in the holder here. Use the scoop to go into the CCS tank and level the product around inside the tank. The more level the product is in the tank from side to side, the less times you're going to have to run out of seed and stop and re-level going forward. So it's best to level the tank right off the bat. That way you can go as long as possible without having to run out of seed and leave skips and gaps in the field. Once you're done filling as many units as you need in each of the tanks, each of these hold 50 units apiece, grab the lid, set it in place. You'll notice on this far side over here there's an arrow, and it says to start lid, align handle here. So if you lay the handle right here, and now to lock it, you're going to want to go opposite of the arrow. So you're going to go clockwise. Just spin it till it becomes nice and snug. You don't have to over torque it, but you want to make sure that they're down nice and snug, because you need to have a seal on the tank, because when the CCS fan is blowing the seed to the mini hopper, it needs to have a pressurized tank. So in order to have an accurate flow to the mini hoppers, you need to make sure that the lid is on snug and secure and straight to keep air pressure inside these poly tanks. As you can see, this ladder swings up when you're done. Just flip the steps in the up position. Just make sure your hands are obviously clear of the pinch points, either raising it or lowering it right there. The conveyor is an opportunity for a pinch point situation. You want to make sure that no one's standing up on the walkway while you're sliding the conveyor back. When you're taking the pin out and replacing the pin, you want to make sure your hands are clear of the pinch point as it lays down in the cradle. As well as once you lay the conveyor on the ground, you want to make sure that obviously you're not dropping it on your foot and you're setting it down on the ground. These vacuum fans, you'll have one on each wing and one on the center unit of the planter. That's what holds the seed into the plate and allows even and accurate planting. They make a lot of noise as they're holding the vacuum pressure. So when you're coming back here to make adjustments or check seed placement and depth or insecticide, anytime you come around here, you either want to put in some hearing protection or hold your hand over your ear when you're close to these fans, because these fans are creating a lot of noise. It sounds like a jet on takeoff. As you can see, some of the units are down. The 24 rows that we're planting for corn, or if a person chooses 30-inch soybeans, are down. As the operator lowers the entire toolbar, those units will start to rise. So one wants to make sure their foot is clear, and also they're clear as they come together to not get pinched in between the units. As you can see, the markers are folded up now, but when we go around the outside of the field as a backup to make sure that we know where we need to drive the next round, and also as an aid when you're backing in for your second round on the outside, you want to use your marker. Obviously, this marker, when it swings out, it adds another 30 feet off of the edge of the planter. So if you're out in the field and someone else is operating a piece of equipment, you want to make sure you're in the clear of that marker as it comes down to make contact with the ground. When these markers come out and down, they go up into the air quite a ways and then swing way out. You need to make sure that you're aware of a clear path of travel for these markers to make contact with the ground. If not, you could potentially put them into a power line or into a tree or into something else, or a piece of equipment sitting next to you, or a building. As you can see from this warning decal, one wants to make sure you have the safety blocks in place on the cylinder to prevent the machine mainframe from sinking down onto you if you're ever working under the individual row units or under the mainframe for any reason. Just make sure you've got your safety blocks in place. When you take them out, they pin right back in here for the stowed position. As you can see, these main cylinders here, this is what causes the planter to fold and unfold. The planter right now is in the fully unfolded position, in plant or field position. When you're transitioning between planting and transport position, as you can see, these cylinders, the way they pull the wings in, these cylinders start to draw in where they're right in line with the wheels. When they're halfway, not completely unfolded, not completely folded, you've got a kind of a V going on with the wings. You make sure that you do not put the planter in the fully down position where this cylinder right here comes in contact with the top of these main transport wheels. If you lower it all the way, you will destroy these cylinders, because they're not made to drop into the planting all the way down position while the planter is in a V, partially unfolded position. Just make sure if you're going to drop it down all the way into the ground, like in plant, or in particular to fill the seed, to engage the conveyor belt, to load the CCS tanks, you want to make sure you're all the way unfolded, or you're folded up enough that you don't put the cylinder on top of this wheel right here and break your cylinder. Behind this safety shield, removed by these two bolts up on top, is an electric motor that turns your agitator shaft that goes between both of the CCS tanks to keep the seed agitated to allow it to freely keep flowing into the mini hoppers. Occasionally you'll have a cotter key that breaks in here, and when you go to replace it, you need to just be careful that you don't accidentally get your hand wrapped into the movement as it goes back and forth in a rocking pattern behind this shield. This is the back side of the CCS tank. You have the plumbing coming in the front side, spreading out into the plenum, and then separating into the individual tubes carrying seed to each of the individual mini hoppers, starting in the main frame and working its way all the way to the outmost row of the wing. You can see how each of the tubes end up splitting off and feeding each one of the individual mini hoppers to place the seed into each individual row. As you see, each of the individual tubes feed out from the CCS tank down to each of the individual mini hoppers. As you see, it comes into the mini hopper. This yellow portion is what they consider the mini hopper. We slide the lid off. You can see down inside the mini hopper. These hoppers will never fill completely full. You're never going to see seed near the top. The seed is down below this elbow. As it comes in, it goes down straight at an angle, and so you're only going to see seed in the very bottom of the mini hopper. If you see any seed at all in the mini hopper, the plumbing is clear and you're getting seed to the individual units. You may not have enough vacuum pressure or something else may be your problem, but as long as you see seed in the bottom of this mini hopper, your delivery from the CCS to the mini hopper is complete and good. As you can see, the air is carrying the seed through the tube around the elbow and then down at an angle into the mini hopper. The air is vented out of the ports, blows through the screen to make sure none of the kernels accidentally blow up and pop out, and then is vented through the side out into the atmosphere. That is so you keep a steady flow of air pressure through the mini hopper and keep seed flowing. As the seed flows down the gravitational slope at the bottom of the mini hopper, it feeds into the seed plate housing, which in turn meters the seed so you have precise placement of the seed through the seed tube into the soil. To gain access to the individual seed plates, place your hand on the end of this rubber strap, pull it out and away to the side, and you can grab the side of the covering, pull it to the side. You'll notice in here there is a latch that connects onto this aluminum plate. If you tip it at just the right angle down and to the side, it will disengage, and then you can pull it off to the side and take it free and away from the seed plate. This is an individual seed plate meter. You can see each one of these divots holds a seed in it. This is what gives you precise spacing on your corn. In particular, corn is a very finicky plant. It needs to have precise spacing in order to get maximum yield. So one seed is carried by vacuum pressure provided by this line here onto the inside of this plate, and it keeps inside here is completely vacuum pressure, pulling the seed into this divot. One seed goes into each of the divot. It's on the opposite side, of course, on this side of the seed meter plate. You can see the edge of the corn kernels right here. The idea is you have one kernel in each one of these divots. This is one of 3 vacuum orbital motors. It creates a vacuum to hold the seed to the plate in each individual divot. Each wing and the center fixed 6 rows has their own vacuum system. You'll notice going out from the fan in both directions on this right wing is a tube. That tube has got the vacuum pressure, which then in turn feeds to each individual lines to each individual row unit. Again, the air has created a vacuum from the fan back there, comes through the tube, comes to the end here. See the line coming in on the elbow on the side, runs down to each individual row unit, comes to the back side of the seed plate. This is what keeps your seed in each of the individual divots. Through the elbow, into the inside, keep your vacuum pressure sealed within this seal along the outside. As the wheel goes around, as we're facing it clockwise, so as it's spinning around, it picks up seed down in this portion at the bottom where the mini hopper empties into this plate housing. Seed is all on the back side of this plate up to about this level. Seed fills into the individual divots. Vacuum pressure provided by this tube provides pressure on this side, a sucking pressure to hold the seed kernels into the plate. As the seed goes around, it goes past the double eliminator, which keeps 2 kernels from hanging onto the same divot because you want 1 kernel per divot as it goes around. It continues by, it knocks off the doubles right here in the double seed eliminator, comes around, and as it comes right to about this position here, you'll notice it loses vacuum pressure. So once the vacuum is removed, there's nothing holding the kernel to the opposite side of the divot. Then you have a knockout that makes sure that it doesn't accidentally get wedged, because sometimes there's not enough talc or there's too much insecticide or other product placed on the seed, it might get stuck on the back side of this divot. This eliminator knockout comes by and pushes each individual seed out of the individual divot. Once the seed is knocked out of the plate, it falls down by gravity through the seed tube, down in at an angle, all the way down to the ground, and these openers provide a trench, and the seed drops down at the precise depth and into the trench. These are the gauge wheels to give you a precise depth on the cutting wheels for your openers. Back here is your press wheels. These press wheels shove the dirt down and around the furrow to give good seed to soil contact for each individual kernel as it drops down into the ground. These two openers here create a true V, which is signature to John Deere. The trench is made in a perfect V by these two opener coulters coming together and creating a perfect V to have perfect seed to soil contact at the base of the trench to allow good growth for the seed. So as these come through and cut the soil, the seed is dropped out right behind the opening down here, right into the bottom of the furrow. Then as the planter rolls along, the press wheels on the back push the edges of the furrow back together and lightly pack the soil so you have good seed to soil contact, which allows good germination with proper soil temperature and moisture. You'll notice on the openers, they have scrapers on both sides to try to keep the dirt from building up or mud. If it's slightly tacky conditions, you want to make sure that these openers are indeed staying scraped clean so that you get a tight, nice V-bottom trench to drop your seed in at the precise depth. These here are your gauge wheels. You adjust the gauge wheels in the back. This is what controls the depth of your openers. So that is how you can adjust from 2 inches or so for corn down to about 1 inch or so for soybeans by adjusting these wheels. As we talked about, this is your gauge wheel. This allows how deep your cut opener goes into the ground. The farther this wheel, the gauge wheel goes up, obviously the deeper we're cutting our trench. Therefore, the deeper we are placing our seed. The shallower this wheel is, or the lower it is, the shallower the furrow is, therefore the shallower the seed is. In order to adjust the gauge wheels, pull up on the T-handle. To go lower or to drop the trench, you adjust it down with the T-handle, which allows the gauge wheel to come up. To go shallower, you pull the handle up and go to the top, which engages the dog ear with the gauge wheel frame sooner, which doesn't allow the furrow to go as deep and keeps the unit riding up higher in the soil. Again, a rule of thumb, about 1.5 inches to 2 inches for corn, 1 inch to 1 3/4 inches for soybeans. Each of these individual notches represents 1/4 inch. When these cut wheels are brand new, they come out at 15 inches. As you put acres on them, they obviously wear down. So they cannot label each of these notches a precise depth because it's just a reference to how much wear is in place on the individual cut wheel on each individual unit. So as more acres go on the machine, there is less wheel, so to speak, cutting because it's wore off. So therefore, the deeper you actually have to go to keep the same soil depth, because your cut wheel is actually grinding away and becoming less deep. So it's just a reference volume. So each time, like here, if I want to go 1/4 inch deeper, to go 1/4 inch deeper, I would pull it up and give it a twist, just a little twist. And now I'm 1/4 inch deeper. If I want to go 1/4 inch shallower, I would take it up, just twist it 1. Now let's say I wanted to go 1/2 inch shallower. So now I would take it and I would move it up 2. Now each of them is 1/4, so it's obviously 1/2 inch. If I wanted to move it up 1 inch shallower, I would take it up and I would move it. There's 1/2 and there's another 1/2. So now we are 1 inch shallower. To take this T-handle and go up is shallower. To take the T-handle and go down is deeper. And obviously go what with each individual farm family that we're serving wants. But just a rule of thumb again, 1.5 inches to 2 inches on corn and 1 inch to 1 3/4 inches on soybeans, give or take. These here are your press wheels to push the furrow closed to have good seed to soil contact. They're staggered just a little bit. This one is forward of this one in a V pattern to cause the trench to collapse just slightly. You don't want it too tight, you don't want it packed too tight, but you also don't want slabbing where you can actually see the seed and there's no soil collapsing down in and around the seed. The idea is to have a very light pressure of all dirt touching the seed all the way around. At a light pressure, it causes germination with the right amount of ground temperature and water and soil contact. To adjust the amount of pressure you have, you grab this T-handle, pull it down and over to the middle, and now if I was to go all the way up, this now takes all the pressure off. There is a spring attached to the T-handle to a stock point right here. Now if I grab the press wheel, you'll notice there's no pressure on it. Basically it's just the weight of this steel frame and the wheels causing some light compaction to press the furrow closed. The next step is notch 1. Now you can tell there's just light pressure. Most of the time you are going to be running in notch 1 or notch 2. Occasionally, if it's very, very dry, you're going to end up going even into like the 3rd notch. Very, very, very seldom are you going to end up going all the way into the 4th notch. There's just a tremendous lot of pressure and you just end up breaking a lot of springs and you cause too much compaction where the sprout has to really, really fight and gets a lot of fatigue trying to burrow its way up to the surface. So you're almost never going to run it in the number 4 position. Most common is either all the way off. If it's really, really wet, it's a balancing act. You want good seed to soil contact, but you don't want too much compaction. So every field is different. If you have the farmer available, it's best to have him come out and take a look and make sure he's happy with the way each individual field is going. Or if you have their neighbor who's kind of helping you and telling you which fields to go, I would always recommend having them take a look and make sure that you're getting a good seed soil contact and you're getting the right down pressure as well as depth. Because these gauge wheels are constantly moving back and forth, up and down with the undulating ground as you're planting seed, this here wear point gets a lot of friction back and forth as these wheels are rubbing back and forth as they're going up and down, up and down, up and down, going over the clods and going over the different furrows in the field. You want to make sure you grease each one of these about every week or every 1,000 acres, whichever comes first, just to keep it lubed and keep it from getting too much friction and wearing out. Okay, each of the mini hopper assemblies, along with the plate housing, vacuum lines, supply lines, they can all detach and give you access to your seed tube to clean the sensor, to make sure there's no blockage if you happen to go through a lot of mud and you're not getting an accurate sensor reading. To disengage this entire assembly, you grab the latch here, pull down on this lock, pull it up, slide this ear out of the way, and you grab the back part of this whole assembly, pick it straight up. These ears here lock into these shafts on both sides. Just carefully but firmly just wiggle with it till they pop free. Once they're free, pull them to the side. Just kind of carefully move them out of the way. And now that gives you access to your seed tube. You're looking down the seed tube. Off to your right, you'll see that electrical connection. That goes down to your sensor. That is what shows up on your 2630 monitor and tells you whether you have an accurate seed population and each row is actually planting. It senses by sonar, it senses the seed dropping down through the tube, and at so many a second tells you you're at your right population. That tube, of course, empties out at the bottom of the true V, right behind the opener, right next to the fertilizer tube or the insecticide line. So your insecticide is applied right next to the seed, and then it goes right down the furrow to the press wheels, and the furrow is closed and planting is complete. Whenever the operator's in the cab ready to fold or unfold, everyone else on site, volunteers, family, farmers, media, needs to make sure they're well in the clear of the equipment. As this machine folds up, you can imagine the tractor is going to be rolling forward. The back of the planter is going to roll backwards just a little bit. Your wings are going to swing forward and towards where the duals of the tractor are right now. So everything is going to be moving in really 4 different directions. So obviously before, as an operator, you start to fold or unfold the equipment, you obviously want to make sure you have a wide enough area where you have plenty of room to allow the planter to unfold in particular, or to fold for the rear and forward movement of the machine, and then that everybody is in the clear and out of the way, in particular kids or anybody else. And special caution at night, just make sure you know where everybody is before you start to fold and unfold. Obviously, it goes without saying, there's a pile of pinch points as this big transformer moves from field position to road position. You need to make sure you're obviously out of the way of the support arm there where Proudly Helping Farm Families in Crisis is written, and obviously where the main frame will meet up with the wings as everything folds together. Obviously, when this machine is folded up, it's still pushing 17 feet wide, which means actually the units come out to here. But something a lot of times you don't think about if you're on a guy's yard or you're trying to maneuver into a field around an old farm place is your mirrors. You just want to make sure you keep your mirrors out of the trees from tearing your mirrors off. And also obviously your stack, and any low-lying branches will tear off a GPS Starfire receiver. So just keep in mind of tree branches and limbs hanging near your tractor cab while you're trying to maneuver this long piece of equipment in and out of a driveway or onto a farmer's yard. As you can see, the American flag and the top part of the conveyor to load the seed into the CCS tanks is very high, much higher than the tractor cab and the Starfire receiver. The height for this machine when it's fully raised in transport mode is right at 13.6. If you come to any kind of an overpass or underpass that's anywhere near 13.6, make sure you wait until traffic is nowhere in sight, and I mean crawl, and absolutely crawl underneath it. The idea is the American flag is a little bit higher, so if you're crawling at like a mile an hour or a half a mile an hour, you're going to hit the American flag and not wreck the conveyor belt. So you want to be very, very careful. If you get into a very tight position, you can lower the machine just a little bit and gain another 6 to 8 inches. But again, if it doesn't say 13.6, do not try going underneath of it because you will not fit. As you can see, it's a very wide machine. When it's in transport, the tractor of course stays the same. It's 12 feet wide from outside a dual to outside a dual. Your normal cattle hauler, semi-trailer is about 8 foot 6 inches. So you're going to be hanging over roughly about 2 feet wider than a normal lane. Then when you add, when the machine is folded up, when this planter is folded up, it comes in at 16 feet 6 inches. That's a lot of width. You got to be able to share the road and be willing to slow way down and get over. Now you've got to balance this. You cannot get over too far, otherwise obviously you will dump it in the ditch. Gravity works all the time. So just keep in mind when you're going down the road, you are 16 feet 6 inches wide. That is a lot of width, and you need to give that the healthy respect that it deserves and give people the time to get out of the way, and you to slow down and allow people to pass safe. It's not a race. We need to make sure we get these family farmers helped in a safe and cautious and courteous manner. We don't want to be running people off the road, and we sure don't want to end up in the ditch.